You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
So, welcome back, everybody. We're going to start another year of the Paul Young Podcast. We'll just see what happens. I don't really know. But let's do a little review. I think one of the reasons that I like this time of year is that I clean up my office, for one thing. I don't know what it is, but I sort of get a nesting thing about starting a new year and want to start it as clean as possible. I have most of my junk normally laying around in boxes or folders or somewhere out of sight. But one of the things that I do like to do is think back on the year. And as I was going through the last year's calendar and beginning to think about the things that I've done, I had a really busy year. It didn't feel that way, but when you learn to live just responding to what's in front of you, you tend to get a lot done and you don't even realize it. So I'm going to kind of run through some of the things that have happened this last year and then tell you a little bit about what may be coming in the future because, you hold any of those plans very loosely because you just never know. Things can change in an instant, as many of you and I know. So near the beginning of the year, we had one of our intensives in Atlanta. And if I remember right, I think Chris Green was a part of that. It was hosted by Ernie and T and Christy. So Ernie, Ty, and Therese, who've been helping with the intensives, and Christy, who also is one of the masterminds behind that. An intensive, if you don't know, is a time where we spend a concentrated weekend going through basically 4 elements, but every one of them is different because what makes the difference is who comes. We're not just there to tell people information and all that. It's very relational and very interactive and very encounter-centered. And when I say encounter-centered, I'm talking about actually taking the risk that Jesus lives in you. Like John 14:20, on that day you'll know that I'm in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. And of course, wherever Jesus is, the Father and the Spirit also are. So why don't we have the capacity to communicate in a very intimate sort of way? If God lives in me, God lives in my emotions, in my body, in my intellect, in my imagination. There is lots of ways that God can communicate to me through relationships, through people that I interact with, through my enemies. These encounter-centered weekends are focused not just on encounter, but also on our thinking about God or the higher power, the God that you believe in. I think there's a phrase that 12-steppers use with regard to that. The God of your understanding. I think that's what it is. So a lot of times in the process of coming to healing, the God of our understanding changes a lot. We become a little bit agnostic, if not atheistic, toward the God that we have had in our imaginations that was not sufficient to trust. And these intensives work on some of those questions, on some of how we live our lives, the choices that we make. If we have a high theology, a high view of God, we end up beginning to see human beings in the eyes of God. And we look through the lens of Jesus at who human beings are. And so we end up with a high anthropology. So we had an intensive in Atlanta. Not long after that, I was in Miami with a group of people that are very fun to be around. It's a very, very eclectic community. When you're a white person, you're a minority, for sure. It's Hope for Life Miami. Hope, the number 4, Life Miami. Giovanna and Laki Didlani, they are the ones who coordinate that group. But don't be surprised if you go out for dinner that you'll end up having a concert of, whether it's Nicaraguans or Haitians or Mexicans. But people will just break into song spontaneously. Plus, their gatherings are a lot more fun than most of us have had in our religious traditions, but they're always great to be with. I also went to the Washington, D.C. area with Baxter. We had a grand time there. I flew to Sydney with a dear friend of mine, and actually, in the last 15 years, this was the only time, I think, that I was on a trip where I wasn't the person. The person that people came to hear or listen to. I was there to carry luggage, basically. And I didn't do a very good job at that. But, a friend said, "You want to go?" And they're paying for it. So I said, absolutely. We basically ate our way through Sydney, which was a grand experience. It was really fun being in the background, listening to my friend speak to a large community of people. He's rather well known in Australia. That was wonderful. Then I was up in Edmonton, spoke to the Young Professionals Organization, YPO, evening, I want to say concert, but it really wasn't. There was an incredible artist there who had been painting on canvases in the back of the room, and I spoke to the young professional business community about things that matter. You can spend your whole life, but at the end of your life, they're not going to be putting up the numbers that you, places you built or money you've earned. It's not going to be about that at all. It's going to be about the legacy of love, the kinds of relationships and the depths, the ways that you have touched people. It's going to be the loving, relational ways that you have spent your life. And right from, if you're married, your spouse, through your partners, relational and business-wise, your day-to-day interactions with kids and your children and extended family, and just on and on it goes. That's where the real impact happens. And it's where the cosmos actually is changed. So Edmonton, a little bit chilly that time of year, but it was great. And then, in the midst of all these things I'm telling you that I did, we had kids, grandkids, their sports, going to their dances and their plays and their choirs. That's some of the best times of our lives, is when we just get to go and watch our grandkids like we used to watch our kids. I think I coached every one of our 6 kids in something. When you're an elementary coach or even middle school, you don't have to know a whole lot, but it helps if you know a little bit. And I knew at least a little bit, I think. But had a great time teaching my kids, and now I get to watch my grandkids, and that's been very, very fun. Went up to British Columbia off the coast of BC. It was the Mark Center who put on this absolutely wonderful, creative, artistic, actually it was called Create With Us Retreat. So there was a lot of time to actually listen to God, find God in the spaces in between all of our activity and our work and the things that we do with our hands and with our intentions of our minds. It was at Barnabas, which is off the coast. You take a little ferry off the coast of British Columbia. Beautiful place. Hosted at that time by Evie and Steve Clausen. But it was Eden and Bradley Jerzak. It was me, and it was, who am I forgetting? I know I'm forgetting somebody. Probably somebody really important, but sorry. That's the way my brain is working these days. Not long after that, I took a trip to Switzerland and Germany. Part of it was a business trip in the sense that one of the things that I'm working on for the next few years, just one of those projects that sits in the background and keeps churning away, is this large musical stage production. It's really a play that's a musical play that is being put together first out of Germany. And I think that's where it's going to be workshopped. But it's intended to be of the best quality. The musician that we already have associated with this particular work is one of the best known in Europe. Actually, I think he just had a concert in Poland that was attended by 100,000 people. Not known very well on this side of the world, but that may change. His name is Michael Patrick Kelly. Michael Patrick Kelly. And he's part of the Kelly family. If you're European, you would probably know who the Kelly family is. It's so fun. He's become a friend and now is being woven into this production. We have another friend who's a top-tier symphonic orchestrator, if that's a word, orchestrator. She writes orchestras and puts together the symphonic sides of film and things like that. I can't think of her name. She's really a good friend. Anna Rice. So she's getting excited about putting in some of the orchestration and symphony music in the background of this production. One of the things that we are hoping to do with this is to build it in such a way that a high school can do it with 4 actors on a simple stage, all the way up to potentially West End in London and Broadway in New York. But, Who knows? That may happen, that may never happen, but that's okay. The process and the people that you meet, that's where the gold is. So we're very excited. Again, eventually, if this moves in the direction that we think it may, we would like to make it available to other cultures and their musicians to add their own music into the structure of the play itself. And so we'd have Brazilian musicians doing the music from Brazil if it's being produced and shown in Brazil. South Koreans in South Korea, Chinese, African in a particular culture, African nation cultures, that kind of thing. Open source, that people can make the changes to it as they like. If you don't know about open source, it's kind of a little perturbing thing in my experience. I got to the place where I don't even know if I should talk about this. This is way back, probably 25 years ago. So I won't get specific, but I wrote a play of a particular piece of work where there was already a play existing that I didn't like. I didn't like the play that existed. So I rewrote one, and I rewrote that whole book and the play. And it was so much better. It sounds so egotistical, doesn't it? But it was. It was better. And I sent it to the people that had the publishing rights for the play. And I just said, I'll just give this to you. I don't care if my name's on it. I don't care if I make anything from it. I don't care. In fact, just take it. And they said, we won't do that. We already have a published version and we're going to stick to that. That's not open source. Open source is where you can bring your own creativity and your own ideas. You stick with the main fundamentals of the structure of what it is. Plus, a lot of the work has already been done. So it's easier to do that. But then, you can tweak it for your culture. Because there's things that come across in a play that are very Western. You would want people in India to tweak it so that it's much more culturally sensitive and respectful. So that's in the background. So that's one of the reasons that I went to Germany, was to spend some time talking about the play, the musical. And in Europe, there are hundreds of outdoor theaters. I mean, like really good outdoor theaters. You wouldn't find them like that here in the US or in Canada, but there's hundreds of them, like in Germany or Switzerland. And we got to see one of those, which is not a top tier production stage, but it was really impressive just for what it was. Very surprising. But one of the other reasons that I went to Switzerland was to baptize a 13-year-old. And I got to know her and her family. I already knew Marga. She had produced a documentary on sexual abuse and wrapped it inside of art and dance. So the documentary itself is very beautiful. And they were going to show the documentary for the first time. There's a term for that, which totally escapes my mind. It's not just their debut, but you can figure it out. And they were going to show that for the first time in Lausanne. And so they invited me to come over to be there in the documentary. And so they did dance beautifully. And Marga and David's 3 daughters all participated in different ways in the dance. Actually, you had 3 generations who were dancing on stage at the first time. Middle Eastern type dancing. It was very beautiful. And we had a panel discussion afterwards, moderated by a therapist. 3 of us who have had a history of sexual abuse were part of that. It was beautiful. And then I was able to go to different communities. I was invited to come speak, and so I did a bunch of that. I baptized Zoe in a very cold lake. Well, I did with her dad, David. Some of the nuns from the nearby monastery heard that I was there, and they came over and celebrated the baptism with us, and then invited us back to the monastery. And they showed us where they have this thing where the nuns are being, I'm going to butcher this tremendously. I'll just give you the idea, where they're going to be inducted into the monastic life. There's a word that they use for that too. But they do a project as part of this ceremony or celebration. And 2 of the nuns had done a complete play on the shack. And I looked at the script that they used and written and all that. It was quite profound. It was big. And so 2 of them had been able to pull that off in a very beautiful manner. You know what was interesting? And this is one thing about how relationships work around the world, is that when Lexi was having a problem with placenta previa for the baby that she was pregnant with, we heard from people all over the world that were praying for us, that know us, and some strangers. But the monastery as a whole let us know that they were praying for us and praying for Lexi specifically. I'm like, come on. Maybe that's one of the greatest purposes of prayer, is that it creates a union and community. We know that all prayers don't get answered, right? A lot of the ones that we think should be answered don't get answered, and some of the ones that get answered, we're surprised that they get answered, and there's a lot of silence on the part of God. And we're going to talk about that, but it's a topic for another day. So Switzerland and Germany was a wonderful experience. Noemi and Ilya both want me to baptize them on another trip, so we'll see if that'll happen. Loved it. Loved being with the people, loved being in different situations of the community of faith. Got into a little bit of trouble at one place because we found out that the German translation of Lies We Believe About God wasn't quite accurate. But that's, again, a topic for another conversation, because it is an important conversation and directly applied. I'll probably bring it up again when we talk about the problems of translation. So then we had School of Theology in Sun River, Oregon, which is near Bend, central part of Oregon, which we do regularly. And then we had the Open Table Conference at Warner Pacific University in Portland. And they're going to be doing that again this coming year. So that's on the 2025 schedule, and I'm going to be part of that this coming year. I haven't been a part of the panel that they've been doing on the life of Paul. But if you want more information about an incredibly profound community and people who love each other well and are rigorous about their theology, Open Table community, the Open Table Conference community, are ones that you should take a look at. Just go to opentableconference.com. And you can look up John McMurray, Macmurray. And also, as I mentioned, John McMurray, one of the best books that's out there and very readable. It resonates easily, and it's on deconstruction. Is a little bit, Bradley Jerzak and I have talked about it. It just seems a little too brutal of a word, and it seems like you're left with nothing. So we've begun to use the idea of detox. You go through a process of detoxing, but the things which are true and right and real remain, while the things that have been harmful or hurtful begin to be burned away in one sense or another. Or the artist comes and begins to remove the bad spillage that's on the bridal gown. Or, there's lots of metaphors for it. But his book is called Spiritual Evolution, John McMurray. Anytime that I put a list together of books I recommend, that book is on there, especially for those of us who come from an evangelical background. So let's see, Sun River School of Theology, and it's on the Open Table Conference website as well. Then I went up to Fairbanks, Alaska, a week after their longest day of the year, which it doesn't actually get dark. So I was up there close to the longest day of the year. It didn't get much dark when I was there either. Takenya was there. She was the host, an incredible artist. Again, had a marvelous time with a group of people there. We did an intensive in Knoxville. Ben and Angie Testerman hosted that. Anytime there's an intensive, you can see that Ernie, Ty, and Therese are in the background. Therese goes by T, and she does a lot of the organization. Ernie does a lot of the cooking, and he's a good cook. And if you get him around a piano, you'll find out he can play the piano. So Knoxville Intensive, that was with Chris Green. Again, it's so different. Every one of them is different. And it depends, again, on who comes, which makes it all the more fun. Baxter Kruger and I, we went down to California. It was hosted by Andy Ann, whose name is a combination of her parents. They named her Andy Ann, and Scott McCarroll. I said to Scott, he has the gift of disorganization. And it is kind of a gift. Maybe you don't look at it like that, but he cannot organize something to save his life. But he's married to Andy Ann, and she's, kinds of saves him. But I tell you, really beautiful things happen in the midst of disorganization. Sometimes I am sure we organize ourselves to death. That is, we don't allow any flexibility or room for the Holy Spirit to do much. And then we get all mad when something happens to order of service or what we thought and expected. And really, that's a lot of times when the work of the Holy Spirit becomes most obvious. So that was down. We also went fishing. I think it was Sacramento River. We caught a bunch of fish. It was catch and release. And it was just before the big salmon run. But we didn't catch any steelhead. But we caught a lot of other littler guys. And it was so fun. Spent the day out there threatening to get a sunburn. So Baxter and I were down there for that. It was part of it was hosted by Brent Locker, who is a beautiful man, if you know him. He's down in California, has a community of faith down there. Also, in the middle of all this, I began writing, struck a deal with Hachette, who is the publisher that took the book internationally of The Shack, and it's for a sequel for The Shack. So we'll talk more about that later. Then Baxter Kruger and I went to Chennai, India, which is 12 and a half hours difference from the west coast of the United States. So it's like almost exactly the opposite side of the world. And let me tell you, it feels like it. Not so much on the way there, but on the way back. On the way back, there were some mess ups and flights and things like that. It took 35 hours to get home with a 12 and a half hour time zone change, and I was basically catatonic. While there, we were hosted by Lovey and Jasudian Sylvester. I got to meet Karis, who's their daughter, who's a young person who I greatly care for. And so they have a whole community there who has sort of branched off from some of the traditional, acceptable, evangelical, charismatic Pentecostal sorts of points of view. And a lot of it is because of Baxter. Baxter Kruger wrote a book called Across All Worlds, which is basically my favorite book that Baxter has written. And this community took that book and built a study guide sentence by sentence on that. And so they have built their theology on Baxter's really high view of God and high view of humanity. It's really paid off in terms of that community. We had the Grants there from Australia. We had Bruce Walkup there from Australia. We had, Paul Gulf from the UK. Such a wonderful community of people, good friends, people that I've known for a lot of years. So when you walked into that conference, you had these, I always say, I think I've told you this, but I don't know who I told it to. We had all these major, beautiful graphic design posters all over the walls from the early church, from Athanasius, with a quote from Athanasius, Origen, a quote from Origen, and throughout the church history. You could see these, and they had then a C.S. Lewis one. They had really great people, Dorothy Sayers, brilliant luminaries of their times with regard to the clarity of George MacDonald. But they had one of Baxter. I was so thrilled that Baxter got honored because he's fought the fight, been in the trenches, but they really honored him. And the reason that they invited me was because they heard me say on some speech or podcast or something that I, at the age of 50, was finally at the place where I had no secrets and no addictions and finally knew what it was like to be a child and learned how to stay inside the grace of one moment. Joy had become a constant companion, and I was the same person in every situation. And at first they didn't believe it, so they contacted the Aussies, said, "Is this true?" And they said, "Yeah, it's true. He lives this way." And so they decided to become, they call it walking in the light, where they have decided that secrets are no longer something that they want to have in their marriages, in their relationships, in their work environment. And so you've got all of these couples who have made this change to walking in the light. And it's one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in my life. Did an intensive up in Washington with Leah and Derek Holzer. Bradley was a part of that, and we always have a good time. Again, so different. Bradley was there. The conversations even that started before the intensive proper started changed the whole direction of what we were doing and turned out to be beautiful and right and good. I went to McMinnville, which is part of Oregon, and spent a weekend with New Horizons community with Galen Gingrich. And that turned out to be just a beautiful weekend. I was the keynote speaker at Writer Fest in Nashville, got to meet with the guys on death row, which was always amazing. I use amazing a lot, but you know what? I'm amazed. I live a life of gratitude and amazement. So between all of that, lots of Zooms and interviews and, And that's what I said. I look back and I was going through the calendar and I'm like, oh my goodness, I did this day and this that same day and this that day. And then I left for this and got to go see the kids do long distance running or track of some sort or cheerleading or singing or dancing or, that's great. But one of the most beautiful things is that Lexi's baby, the one that the placenta previa, and thank you for all of you who prayed about it, because I talked about it just on the 27th, just a few days ago. Micah Willard was born to Lexi and Josh. Healthy, beautiful little baby boy. What the presence of him just as a healer already has been is remarkable. And again, I'm grateful. So, December 29th, right at the end of the year, my Aunt Gladys, I called her up and told her happy birthday. She was turning 104, and we'll see. She does repeat herself a few times. And I'm just like, yeah, I just love to hear your voice. Tell me a story. And she can remember the stories. What a dear person. Quickly for this coming year, the one thing we have on the calendar is Canmore Theological Summit, or Theology Summit in Canmore, Alberta, which is in the lower parts of the Canadian Rockies on the Alberta side. And if you want to go to a beautiful place and spend a weekend, there's where you should go. Bradley Jerzak and Eden Jerzak will be there. Tara Boothby will be speaking. She's the one that's coordinating this whole thing. I'll be there. Baxter Kruger will be there. An Alberta artist named Jared Robinson, he'll be there. If you look up, just Google Theology Summit Canmore, Canmore, May 2025. You'll find it, and it'll have all the details there. If you're inclined and would like to take a little road trip, from there you could go over top of the Rockies, up to Jasper and Banff and Lake Louise, and then down into British Columbia, if you want to do that, or just go up there and then back out the Alberta side. It's a stunning and beautiful place, and we're going to have a great time. If I'm alive and God wills. And which is basically about everything. So that's the one thing that's there. We have potential trips, maybe to the Netherlands, maybe to Ireland, maybe back to Germany, Switzerland, but more in the European area so that I don't have 35 hours flights to get home. I mean, that was a killer. Right now, I am in the midst of working on the sequel for The Shack, and that's what's got most of my attention. And we're back talking about the stuff that we talk about. And I'm so glad that you are a part of this. I've got stacks of people who've contacted me through the contact sheet on paulyoungpodcast.com. Great questions, great comments. We will get to a bunch of those as time goes on. And pardon me if I don't quickly or don't at all have the time to email you back. It's just that my table is full at the moment and looks like it will be for a while. All right. Love to you. Oh, I've got a blessing for 2025. And some of you, it may not seem appropriate, but I like it. And it goes like this. May comfort kiss your cheek and freedom kick your ass. So that's the blessing for 25. May comfort kiss your cheek and freedom kick your ass. With that, I bless you and hug you and love you.